A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vignesh, and I am from the HID Foundation. Today, it's our great pleasure to organize a launch of our latest book in our, in our Critical Studies in Asian series, a series that we publish in partnership with Routledge. Today, we're here to launch our book, STEM Education from Asia, Trends and Perspective. Today, in the first part of the launch, we'll be talking about STEM education policies and teacher education. We are fortunate to have as moderator for the series, which is a session today and on Wednesday, Associate Professor Teo Tiang Wee from Singapore's National Institute of Education. Later on, she will introduce today's speakers. But ladies and gentlemen, it is my true pleasure right now to introduce Ms. Katie Pease from Routledge to share a bit more about the book, about the series, and a special promotion we have for those of you who are attending today's launch. Over to you, Katie.
Fantastic, thank you, Vignesh. I hope you can see my screen okay. Just want to start by saying thanks ever so much for inviting me to talk at this fantastic session. I'm the publisher for Routledge education books in Asia. I work with authors all across the region on books related to all different areas of education. This series is one of our most successful. Routledge Critical Studies in Asian Education has published nearly 50 books, and we're really proud of it. And this book that we're basing the seminar series on is coming from this series. So I've given an example of two other books from the series, which have also recently published, just to give you a flavour of the series. But if you do want to find out more, then please do have a look at the series on our website and contact me. I've given you my email address there. So if you have an idea for a book that you think would fit nicely into the series, or you'd just like a little bit more information, then please do send me an email. As Vignesh said, I have a great offer for you today. As part of the launch of the book, we are offering 40% off the retail price of the book. You just need to enter STEM40 in the checkout. So you can look at that bit.ly link there or copy the QR codes with your phone and you should be able to get there. Or as I say, just write down STEM40 and then you can put that into the checkout when you buy the book. And that's valid until the 11th of March. So I am really excited. And I don't want to keep you too much longer from this fantastic content coming up, but we're really excited to be launching STEM Education from Asia, Trends and Perspectives. We have a fantastic cast of contributors and presenters, so I won't keep your time and I look forward to seeing and hearing from these presenters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. And now it's my true pleasure to introduce Associate Professor Teo Tiang Wee, who will be our series moderator. Tiang Wee, please.
Thank you, Vignesh. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Teng Wee Teo, an associate professor at the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Together with my colleagues, Professor Paul Teng and Associate Professor Tan Ek Ling, we have co-edited this book, STEM Education from Asia, Trends and Perspectives, which is the focus of the official book launch today. I would like to thank the HID Foundation and Routledge for organizing this webinar to provide an official platform for this book launch. There is growing interest in STEM education in the last 2 decades. This is in part driven by the fourth industrial revolution that catalyzes rethinking about how education should evolve to meet the demands for a future workforce equipped with 21st century competencies. According to the World Bank, in 2020, Asia's GDP will overtake the GDP of the rest of the world combined. By 2030, the region is expected to contribute roughly 60% of global growth. This also implies that we will see STEM becoming a commonplace in education the next decade and onward. This book is timely. It captures the voices of 7 Asian economies, namely Bhutan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, Thailand, and the Philippines. The chapters are organized into 4 sections comprising STEM policies, STEM teacher education, STEM curriculum, and research. Today, we invite the commentators and chapter contributors of the first two sections to share with us what is happening in their respective economies in regard to STEM education policies and teacher education. The commentator for the section on STEM policies is Professor Paul Teng. He's the Managing Director of the National Institute of Education International, the education consulting company of the Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Professor Paul Teng reviewed 3 chapters that discuss the STEM macro policies in Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Bhutan. May I now invite Professor Paul Teng to give us an overview of this section.
Thank you very much, Teng. It's a real pleasure to be with this group today. Now, section 1 deals with STEM policies, and the chapters respectively share experiences from 3 education systems, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Bhutan. What the 3 chapters do is that they affirm that policies are very important catalysts and enablers for change in education systems. So having policies which promote STEM as an integral part of national economic development will therefore be a strong incentive to also strengthen STEM education. And that's one of the important learnings from these 3 national systems. However, policies on their own are just articulations of intent by governments and are destined to be ineffective unless backed by instruments such as guidelines, statutes, measures, or directives, which are funded for implementation and accompanied by specific initiatives. And these 3 chapters provide excellent examples of some of these specific initiatives. Broadly, the initiatives may be grouped as supporting measures to reinforce policies, for example, setting up dedicated bureaus to promote STEM education, or support to improve teacher quality for teaching STEM subjects. And thirdly, measures to attract more students in the STEM, and fourthly, instructional policies. Both Hong Kong and Malaysia, as shown respectively in chapters 1 and 2, have purposeful policies aimed at instructing STEM. Now in Bhutan, you'll hear later, the current Bhutanese education system provides segregated domain-specific STEM education. Another key point to note from the 3 chapters is that implicit in STEM policies is the recognition that the STEM subjects contribute to drive innovation and technology development, especially in Hong Kong and Malaysia. So the common anticipated STEM policy outcome, as hinted by Professor Teo, is generally aimed at providing a future-ready workforce for economies at different stages of development. For example, to enable continued economic competitiveness, as in Hong Kong, strengthen the human capital base for economic growth, as in Malaysia, and develop a base for modernizing the economy, as in Bhutan. And these are very well covered in chapters 1 to 3. Moving forward, the case studies presented in this first section show that the policy commitments are very strong indeed in the 3 education systems, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Bhutan, to make STEM an integral part of national development. And there's also general agreement that STEM education and the role of STEM in economic development needs to be further supported. So to end on an optimistic note, Hong Kong is seeing innovation and technology and STEM education advocated as policy-driven initiatives, with the Hong Kong Education Bureau playing a major role. Malaysia has developed the National STEM Strategic Plan, Action Plan, 2018 and 2025, to strengthen the country's STEM ecosystem. Read about it when you buy a copy of the book. In Bhutan, the 2020 Kasho, the Royal Edict for Education Reform, has made STEM education a key priority for the education system. And we're really privileged today to have Dr. Kinley speak to us about that. Readers will find overall that section 1 answers many questions on how policy is linked to implementation, with very concrete examples from the 3 chapters. If I were to explicate a bit more, policies on STEM education are really not new to Asia. I think as noted by Chen et al. In chapter 1, the Hong Kong government invested significant resources between 2015 and 2020 to support its policy imperative of STEM as the basis of maintaining innovation. And in Malaysia, of course, the precursor to STEM is science education. This is chapter 2. The 60-40 science, technical to arts policy in education, established in 1967 by the Malaysian Higher Education Planning Committee, was enforced in 1970 and targets 60% among all upper high school students to concentrate on science, while 40% concentrate in arts. And even in Bhutan, science education started from the adoption of Western education in 1961, and the government's 10th five-year plan, 2008 to 12, prioritized the reform of the STEM curriculum and conducted a needs assessment study. So these are just some explicated details that you can very, very definitely derive from reading the first 3 chapters. So with that, is a very quick overview, indeed, of the 3 chapters in this first section. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Paul Teng, for giving us an overview of the first section on the STEM policies. So today we have with us one of our chapter contributors, Assistant Professor Kinley. We have invited Assistant Professor Kinley from the Department of Science Education from Samtse College of Education, Royal University of Bhutan, to talk about his chapter that provides an account of the current state of STEM education in Bhutan. In addition to sharing with us what he has written in this chapter, I've also invited him to speak about some of the broader education contexts that exist at a time when he was writing the chapter, as well as some of the latest pieces of information that wasn't included in this chapter. And yes, so I will not take up too much time. I will now pass the time over to Dr. Kinley. Dr. Kinley, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am going to talk about STEM education in Bhutan. Before I go with the topic, I just thought maybe like it's new for many of the participants on Bhutan. That's why I have a slide on just to show where Bhutan is located. As some of you are aware, Bhutan is a landlocked mountainous country with a total area of 38,394 square kilometers. You'll see it has border with India in the east, west, and south, and People's Republic of China on the north. Now, again, before I go into the in-depth sharing of the significant contents from the 2 chapters, I would like to caution all the participants here that the 2 chapters is a product of a teamwork. So I foresee that there will be gaps in my presentation, at the same time in the responses that I might give at later. Secondly, I also do not take that I have the authority in STEM education, both at Samtse College of Education and in Bhutan. There are people who have more authority. However, I think because of the opportunity to contribute 2 chapters, I had this privilege to do the sharing. So if there are gaps, sincere apologies. Firstly, I think Professor Paul has briefly touched on what has to be written. And for Bhutan, I think initially the journey of education started from the monastic education. The modern education in Bhutan started somewhere in 1914. However, formally, as Professor Paul earlier mentioned, it was established in 1961. And during the initial phase, as you see in my 3rd bullet point, the main subject that were taught were Hindi, an Indian formal language, arithmetic, along with Dzongkha, the national language of Bhutan. Only in 1962, English was made the main medium of classroom instruction, and it is till today. And as of 2020, the modern and Western education system in Bhutan has completed 6 decades since its introduction in 1961. And as compared to the other education systems of the world, despite the late start, school education in Bhutan has witnessed unprecedented growth and progress within the period of 6 years. Initially, when it was started in 1961, it was just 11 schools, and in 2020, we had 1,132 schools and other institutes in Bhutan. And also on the lower hinge, while we all know that the opportunity of ICT is very massive, still I think the use of ICT in teaching learning process in our education system is still minimal. And at this point of time, it is considered to be because of the lack of resources, at the same time, the competence of the people who are applying ICT. And as Professor Tang mentioned, I'm not going to do the detail here. It will be highlighted in the chapters that is written on how the science subjects are being taught. So in compartments as domain specific, there is a need to change the way mathematics and science are taught in the schools, at the same time also in the colleges of Bhutan at this point of time. And I just want to give you a glance from a study by the Bhutan Council for School Examination and Assessment. In 2013, you can see there was very low score in the science and mathematics subjects for class 12. Again, in 2020, they found out very low score in science subjects of class 10 examination results. And the assessment has highlighted that students' poor performance in science subjects were due to poor performance also in mathematics. Further, again, the PISA-D exam that was initiated in 2017 to benchmark Bhutan education competence in science and mathematics at international level was also found below average with a score of 45.10% to 38.84%. And we have also seen that some literatures have already shown that the gaps in the performance of the students are both due to challenges in inability to use innovative pedagogies, at the same time the fragmentation of the science curriculum. And also it has the studies, some of the studies have shown that Bhutanese students have declining interest in science and mathematics subjects, and this has become a national concern. And from here again in our book, we have indicated there is a need to change ways and mathematics and science are being taught. So, and while the acronym STEM had been there for quite some time, but the active use has only come in significance in the recent times. And the Minister of Education has outlined in 2020 that a STEM curriculum is in place. However, at this point of time, unfortunately, it's not visibly significant in action. And currently, as also Professor Paul highlighted, the government's priority to the top level of our government has given priority to enhance STEM education. And we have also seen that while the previous presenter has mentioned about the importance and the criticality of STEM education, Bhutan is also quite aware that students' fluency in mathematics and science is needed for the development of the country's economy. And the policy document for the Minister of Education in Bhutan has said that students at this point of time in the 21st century should develop 21st century skills of innovation, creativity, and enterprise, and also human values of peace and harmony. And through our literature studies, we have seen this very prominent in the STEM education. And certain things, as Professor Teo mentioned earlier, while I had tried to make an attempt to capture some of the areas that was highlighted to me during the time of writing these two chapters, there was no note taken of the education reform. Currently, Bhutan has embarked deeply in the education reform process. While you will see that the chapter will portray a stance of education system in Bhutan, however, no essence of the urgency in education reform has been highlighted through in the book, while indication has been made. And also, while majority of the work for this book chapter happened during the COVID period, while there are light mentions about how technology became quite significant to proceed with the online teaching and learning process. However, the situation has not triggered much to the contents of the chapters. And the chapter in focus, as you will see, why it is unique for Bhutan is to STEM education, while there is significantly, it has been significantly discussed worldwide. For Bhutan, I think in educational forum, it has not come into limelight. And these two chapters will, in a way, share platform to share about STEM education in Bhutan at a glance, and also show in the second chapter, I would consider this as premature at infancy of our little understanding of the integrated STEM approach on how we have made an attempt to infuse and use in the classroom. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Kinley, for sharing your chapter, as well as bring additional insights that were not written into the chapter. STEM education is always evolving. I understand that at the time of writing, that was the state of STEM education that was represented. I'm sure in 2 years' time, if you were to write the chapter again, there will be, new insights coming, as well as, or the new updates about all the changes that's happening in the Bhutan education system. Just about less than an hour ago, we just, had a news that came out to say that examinations, mid-year examinations will be removed in Singapore. So this is actually part of what Professor Paul Teng mentioned just now about how intentional policies must be backed by purposeful instruments. And I think making such macro policy changes would definitely have impact on the way we do STEM in the classrooms. So with that, once again, I would like to thank Dr. Kinley for preparing this presentation. I will now move on to invite the second commentator for the section for today. He's the commentator for the section on STEM teacher education, Assistant Professor Choy Heng. Heng is also the co-head of the meriSTEM Center, which is the STEM Education Research Center at NIE. Assistant Professor Choy reviewed 2 chapters that discuss the STEM teacher preparation in the Philippines and Thailand. May I now invite Dr. Choy to give an overview of this section. Over to you, Heng.
Hi, everyone. And once again, thank you, Teng, for the introduction. And for the 2 chapters I reviewed, I think it's important to consider the 2 chapters in terms of the complexity of improving STEM education. Now, teaching science, technology, engineering, or mathematics as a discipline on its own is already challenging. And this challenge is multiplied with integrated STEM. And now what you are requiring teachers to do is not just to be experts in their own discipline, but also the ability to see connections across disciplines. And this can be very uncomfortable for many teachers. And as we know, teachers, or even the quality of teachers, is one of the most important factor influencing the education or even the quality of education. And so in this commentary, we really need to think about some of the factors affecting teacher education, in particular policy. I mean, Professor Teng has mentioned the importance of policy in guiding the overall educational landscape. But even in teacher education, we talk about policies such as selection of teachers, policies surrounding teacher education, the content of teacher education, and so forth. But beyond policy, beyond pre-service STEM teacher education, there's also this aspect of professional learning. Teachers' knowledge, mindsets, what they are trying to achieve, their beliefs, all these are part and parcel of what we call professional learning. We want to shift our teachers' knowledge, mindsets towards something that's more productive towards STEM education. Last but not least is the ability to translate ideas into action, and that deals with practice. So we have policy, we have professional learning, and we have practice. But it's not good enough to see them as separate or individual factors influencing STEM teacher education. In fact, one nice metaphor that can be used is to see improving STEM education as confluences of different educational aspects beyond a single change. In fact, Fullan has mentioned, in his work, that any strategy of change must simultaneously focus on changing individuals and the culture or system within which they work. And in both, in this metaphor, we see a confluence as a geographical feature where two or more rivers, each with its own flow and paths, meet to form a bigger river. And in the two chapters I reviewed, you can see this idea very clearly. Although these two countries may have different challenges, they have something common, which is they try to harmonize the changes that they were trying to implement. And I thought before we go into what are some of the lessons that we can learn from the two countries, let's be clear what do we mean by confluences in the context of improving STEM education. First, of course, we are not talking about a single policy or a single professional learning initiative or a single way of practicing. But what we are trying to do is to think of all these different initiatives as a directed flow. In other words, these policies about STEM teacher education, the professional learning initiatives, and the practices should flow towards the same goal. And that same goal may referring to high quality STEM learning experiences. And it's about the coming together of different understandings about these main elements of excellence, or what makes up excellent STEM education. Not about a single understanding, because there's really a variety of understandings about STEM, or what constitutes STEM education. So it's about trying to achieve a balance point in which our different understandings are compatible. And both the Philippines and Thailand illustrate that process of trying to find that balance points within their own context. And so as a result, these educational policies, initiatives, and practices are in sync with the purpose of STEM education. And so this positions improvement as a journey and not merely a destination. And some of the lessons that we kind of learned from the Philippines and Thailand is really that the changes have to take place together, and the efforts are needed to harmonize these changes. In fact, each of these two countries try to find their own balance point and get the initiative and practices to flow in sync. I will leave it to you to read the two chapters to find out more. and I'm sure the next presenter has something to say about it. But viewing improvements as confluences of different factors, I think provide a more holistic way to examine the coherence of STEM education implementation in the different countries, especially in the area of STEM teacher education. And with that, I thank you, and I hope that you will read the two chapters and find out more about how these two countries navigate the complexity of STEM teacher education as they prepare teachers to face the challenges of a STEM education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heng, for the overview of this section on STEM teacher education. So today we have invited Professor Gladys Nivera to talk about her chapter, which is on STEM education in the Philippines. So Gladys is a professor in math education at the Philippine Normal University, the National Center for Teacher Education in the Philippines. So without much further ado, I would like to invite Gladys to take over the session and talk about her chapter. Over to you, Gladys.
Thank you, Tang Wei. And now I will be sharing my screen. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about STEM teacher education in the Philippines. It's a chapter that I co-wrote with Dr. Auxentia Limha, Edwina Eleanor Paderna, and Christian Pastor. Okay, at the time when we were writing the chapter, the Philippines was reeling from poor results in international metrics in math and science, namely PISA, TIMSS, and CPLM. But even in our own national achievement test, we were getting very disappointing results. Likewise, in a board for licensure exam for professional teachers, the passing rate was only around 30%, which means we have like a 70% wastage. And this may reflect on the quality of teacher education programs that we offer. And also it has implications to teacher quantity in our country. But on the upside, the country embarked on a K-12 program, which is a major reform in basic education, to put us at par with other countries in the world in terms of number of years of schooling. So we added 2 years or 3 years to our basic education by adding a mandatory kindergarten and 2 years senior high school with a STEM track. But unfortunately, the STEM track is not offered in the sense of integrated STEM education. Rather, math and science courses are offered separately. Okay, but at this time, it was also challenging for our math and science junior high school teachers as we shifted from disciplinal to spiral progression of content. As you can imagine, they were not trained to teach spiral progression of content. Instead, we were taught in a disciplinal approach in college. And so you find here a physics teacher trying to teach chemistry, biology, and so on. And so you can imagine the discomfort that some of our science teachers experienced. To give you a brief of look at the Philippines, we have 7,100 islands, 112 million people, about 30% of whom are between 0 to 14 years old. So we are a very young and growing population. And these 27 million students in basic education are taught by around more than 800,000 teachers. And at the moment, we have more than 2,300 teacher education institutions scattered all over the country. So as you can imagine, with these big numbers, any minor reform is magnified and can become a really big challenge for the implementers. So what is a typical teacher's pathway? We begin by entering a teacher education institution, and then you choose a 4-year pre-service program. It could be for secondary, elementary, after which you take a licensure exam to be eligible to teach in public schools and even in private. And then you now have like 30 to 40 years from entry to retirement, where you have in-service training or professional development seminars every now and then. But as you can imagine, every stage of the pathway has its challenges and issues. And the chapter covers all of this, no, most of them in detail. But at this point, I would like to give you snippets of the challenges encountered at each stage of the pathway. So in entry to TI, there are questions as to the quality of entrance to education programs. Well, unlike Singapore, where teacher education is a top choice of high school graduates, it is not so in the Philippines because of probably low image of the teacher and low salary. And so this easy accessibility and low entry requirements to teacher education actually implies that anybody can go to teacher ed. That's unfortunate. We don't get the best and the brightest. But to save, to salvage the STEM teacher education program, the Department of Science and Technology and various public and private agencies and industries are actually providing a lot of scholarships to entice top students to go into STEM teacher education. And there are already questions even this early as to the strength of quality assurance policies and arrangements. There is no quality assurance as to the entrance to education programs. And you can also imagine the challenges to quality assurance when you have more than 2,300 teacher education institutions in the country. Now we move to pre-service program. Of course, as we cater to the basic education students, there has to be congruence of teacher education programs with the basic education curriculum. But the problem is we know that universities are very traditional places, like they're very slow to change, and very often the drivers of change are moving very, very quickly all around us, the demands of society, the demands of the workplace, and so on. And sometimes even when the basic education curriculum, the teacher education program is quite slow to respond to the changes. And then we will revisit the quality of programs offered in teacher education institutions. How do they respond to the fourth industrial, even fifth industrial revolution? How do we provide teachers with 21st century skills or interdisciplinary approach, if not transdisciplinary? How do we cater to industry needs? How do we arm the teacher with the skills to teach in the spiral curriculum or an integrated STEM for that matter? So these are questions that we have to revisit when you look at the curriculum provided by CHED, the Commission on Higher Education. Where do we see in the courses provided, the attempt to address all of these concerns? Also, there is this tension between content and theory, and it seems that the focus is on what to teach rather than on how, or at the expense of how or why we teach. So we call for an emphasis on pedagogical content knowledge and also the technological PCK, because these are critical in the delivery of instruction of the teachers when they go to the field. But it is also observed that TEIs do not really focus on STEM teacher educators' conceptions and beliefs. Okay, they teach the way they want to, but we need to revisit their conceptions and beliefs, because these are imbibed by the students. And unfortunately, many of those at the university have this procedural, teacher-centered, perspectives to teaching, when we should be doing conceptual, investigative, learner-centered approaches. So I think this is something that universities can do to improve the pre-service program. With respect to licensure exam, there are questions as to the validity and reliability of the licensure exam, and even the quality of the questions. And is it assessing what we value about education nowadays? How responsive is it to the changes in the curriculum in higher education institutions? Now we go to teachers going into the field, into the Department of Education. Again, quality assurance issues in terms of induction and mentoring programs. How are they inducted into the system? And what support are provided to them in terms of instructional materials, and particularly for STEM teachers, the laboratories, the equipment, the textbooks, and so on and so forth. And the quality of teaching learning environment, how conducive is the environment in the schools, and how much freedom do teachers have to innovate, to interpret the curriculum in the best possible way. Sometimes we hear a lot of comments from teachers about being saddled with a lot of administrative work, a lot of assignments that are non-academic, which robs them of time to focus on instructional matters. And then you have the issue of teacher image and salary. We know that a lot of people say teaching is a vocation, it is a mission. We do it for love of country, love of the students, but we also need to be able to live decently, provide decent lives for our family. And so I think this is critical that we raise the salary of the teachers and improve teacher image as a whole. This way we attract even the best and the brightest to teacher education. Okay, now we go to in-service training. This, the professional growth of a teacher is or the knowledge learning of a teacher does not end with pre-service. There is this 40 years between entry to the system and to exit or retirement. We need aggressive and focused capability building programs for teachers, because if you have been in the service for 30 years, your knowledge is perhaps outdated and the world is changing so fast. But having this cascade training model and one-size-fits-all approach, while very efficient and economical, these are not the best ways to teach the teachers. We really have to customize and provide more rigorous and in-depth training for the teachers in the field. World Bank has cited that the Philippines is very weak when it comes to monitoring and evaluation of programs. And so we did not know how effective these training programs are and how much they translate into actual classroom practices of the teachers. Okay, but we're happy with the very strong support from the private sector and industry. They are aware that the educational system needs help, because we've been having this problem, not just this past few years, but for decades. And so a lot of them are trying to pitch in now and trying to provide programs for teachers. Okay, we also have now the Philippine Professional Standards for Teachers, which at the moment is at the center of all reforms in education in the Philippines. And DepEd-NEAP is taking care of designing the professional development programs for teachers. Unfortunately, PPST is really a generic framework. The competencies there are for all teachers and not very specific to math and science teachers. So bottom line, STEM teacher education responds to a confluence of country-specific factors, if I may borrow the term from Heng. So the chapter looks into governance structure and policies in education. Like in the Philippines, we trifocalized education. Commission on Higher Education takes care of higher ed, DepEd takes care of Department of the Basic Ed, and TESDA takes care of TechVoc. Now, how has the trifocalization of education led to this unintended consequence of fragmentation in the directions, programs, and projects of education? So this is something that we really need to revisit. And also the policies in education, like the mandated curriculum or maybe the suggested curriculum of CHED for teacher education. To what extent is it responsive to the needs of the society nowadays, the needs of basic education? So we really need to look into that. And as before, I want to highlight budget allocation and sufficiency of STEM support. This is very important because at the moment, we know that the Philippines only devote 3.4% of its GDP to education, whereas other countries have 4, 5, 6%. And we need that. We need that particularly for STEM. Okay, and so when we look at STEM teacher education, we cannot look at it in isolation. We have to look at the reforms and demands of basic ed and the fast changing needs and demands of society and industry in general. So 3 terms: consistency, capacity building, and harmonization. Okay, when you go to advanced economies, you go to a particular school and you expect quality education, you know, in any school that you go to. In the Philippines, we have top schools, we have science-oriented schools, excellent teachers, and some successes. In fact, we have like medals in international Olympiads and so on. However, this is not replicated all throughout the archipelago. Like there is a wide gap between the performances of our schools and even our teachers. So there has to be more quality assurance across the different schools and programs. And capacity building, again, how do we expect teachers to teach 21st century skills, to be innovative, you know, investigative, and how do we expect them to teach engineering design thinking, coding, or computational thinking when we do not offer these courses in the university? And why is it that these courses are not in the teacher education curricula in the university? Sometimes because, well, apart from the fact that we subscribe to more traditional courses, we do not have the faculty with the competence to teach such courses. And so there has to be capacity building across the system. And this should include the administrators, because sometimes they are part of the problem. And so they should be part of the solution. And harmonization. Okay, there are so many players in our educational system. And sometimes you wonder, you know, with all of these people and agencies trying to help out the system, how come we are not making significant progress in the past few decades? Perhaps what we need is really to harmonize everything, you know, so that we are moving towards the same goal. And so what recommendations can we offer? Clearly, we need to develop a STEM education framework. We need to have a unified understanding of what STEM education means, what it entails, what competencies we expect from our students, from our teachers. I know that NIEI is working towards an STEM education competencies, STEM competencies. So we really need to have that, to have like common vocabulary for STEM education, and then create a master plan for STEM education to articulate and harmonize the various stakeholders' directions, programs, and projects. The master plan should encompass, you know, from kindergarten all the way to higher ed and grad school, or even to up to the professional level. And we see now that the STEM pipeline is leaking very badly, and we need to stop the bleeding as early as possible, even as early as grade 1, up, you know, and so that we can have more students in STEM. And we really need also to improve students' interest in STEM. In short, we need a master plan for the entire educational system. And I'm happy to say that at the moment there are discussions to have Education Commission 2 legislated, which is a massive and comprehensive review of the educational system of the Philippines. It typically takes 2 to 3 years to do a review, but at the end of it, we expect like perhaps an overhaul of education system. Definitely, we will be looking at some major reforms, and for that, we are hopeful. And so, and hopefully there would be an increase in investment on STEM education. And at the end, we also need to rethink STEM teacher education programs. And like I said, capacitate STEM teacher educators if we are to improve STEM education in the entire country and provide the needed workforce for the 21st century. So thank you, and I hope this presentation offers, contributes to the reflective conversations on the way forward for STEM education in Asia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gladys. And I would like to once again thank all the panelists for your sharing today. So I have heard all the 4 presentations, and it seems that the letter C is something that is commonly mentioned today. So we are all aiming to reach some form of confluence, coherence, congruence, and consistency in STEM education. Even in the way we talk about STEM education, are we all talking about the same thing? And all of this, I guess, we can only reach that goal and the ideal only if we have addressed all the conundrums of STEM education. So with that, I'd like to invite all the panelists now to be back on the webinar so that we can have a conversation here. Once again, I would like to let all the participants know that if you have any questions, please post them on the Q&A function that's below your Zoom screen. And while waiting for more questions to come in, we already have a few questions for the panelists. Some are for specific speakers, but I guess the other speakers can take the questions as well. So maybe we can kickstart the Q&A with the first question. That was actually for Bhutan, for Kinley, but I'm sure the rest of the speakers can all chime in. So the question here is about how does Bhutan implement STEM with the 5E approach? So Dr. Kinley, perhaps you can just help us recap what is the 5E and what is actually written in that chapter.
Okay, thank you. My apologies, I had a power cut. That chapter on the 5E learning is a pedagogical approach. And with our little understanding on integrated STEM approach, inspired by the model that was shared to us by NIEI Singapore when we had some webinars. So we made an attempt to contextualize and then teach a concept of biology using this innovative pedagogy of 5E learning. And then together with that, we try to bring in technology to enhance understanding of the content. Also, by way of making an attempt to make an integrated approach, we also brought in mathematics, a subject domain, to enhance teaching learning of concept of biology in a classroom. And as I said earlier, this is a premature attempt by us with our some and little understanding about the STEM quadrant model that has been inspired from NIEI Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kinley. So basically what Dr. Kinley has described is in the context of what we mentioned in the STEM quartet paper is a kind of a vertical integration where the STEM is actually anchored within a discipline, which in this case in the chapter is biology, and it is the educator's attempt to bring in the other disciplines, to make, the biology lesson, more integrated with the other subjects. So that is a kind of STEM integration, which, is more anchored within the discipline. So that's one approach to STEM. So may I know if the other panelists would like to chime in as well on this particular question? Have you all seen any examples where teachers anchor STEM within a specific subject discipline and bring in, and infuse the other STEM disciplines from there. Okay, if not, I think perhaps we can move on to the second question here. So there's a second question on how the government of Bhutan is promoting STEM education in the rural areas. And not only among the students, but also within the communities. Dr. Kinley?
Yes,
Yeah, may I invite you back again?
A very interesting question. For Bhutan, I think, especially with regards to the curriculum, on STEM curriculum, there is no separate curriculum for the rural and urban schools. It is the same curriculum that apply across all schools, both in rural and urban. While there have been no significant, at the same time, visible attempts of making it very special in the rural attempts. However, currently, I think the government is in a continuous attempt to train teachers on how to teach STEM subjects to the students in a most meaningful way. And this has started, I think, long time back with the training teachers on enhancing their pedagogical skills and also their technological skills to promote learning of science.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kinley. I think now I will pick on a question here, where the rest of the panelists can actually address. There is a request here to share on the STEM education approach in teaching. So maybe I can direct the question to Gladys so that Kinley can take a short break.
Okay, I can talk about our approach in the university, Philippine Normal University, which is the National Center for Teacher Education. You see, innovation can happen at the institutional level. And in our case, we really tried to innovate the teacher education program to address the demands of the K-12 reform. And so we offered courses in integrated sciences, integrated science 1, 2, 3, instead of the traditional physics, chemistry, biology, to provide the pre-service teachers with the experiences needed to see the integration of the disciplines in action, and be able to translate this into practice when they go into the field. So that is one way of addressing the current problems now, and it's how we teach STEM in TNU. Oh, by the way, also with respect to the undergraduate program, for elementary teachers, we also now, because the Philippines require only a generalist curriculum for elementary, but in our case, we offered like a twinning program. You can be a major in math and science at the same time, because our goal is really to strengthen the students' knowledge in math and science, even though they're going to teach in the elementary, because we think that sometimes it's the critical link, when the teachers in elementary grades are not able to teach math and science properly in elementary, then we experience problems when they go to high school. The students hate mathematics and science. They are deficient in the skills and knowledge, and the problem compounds from there. So we thought it was critical, and that's why even in our programs, we try to really strengthen the math and science component of our elementary teacher ed program.
Thank you very much, Gladys. May I know whether my other panelists would like to chime in on this question? Sure. Okay, if not, then perhaps I can talk a little bit about the meriSTEM's approach to STEM teaching. So meriSTEM, I've probably not mentioned it in the introduction, is actually the Multi-Centric Education Research and Industry STEM Center at NIE. We are a research center, but we also do research teaching as well as outreach work. So Dr. Kinley mentioned about the STEM Quartet just now. So the STEM Quartet, we have already published the paper. So if you would like, I can actually provide the link in the chat later on to access that paper. It's open access, so you can download it for free. Basically, the way we look at STEM, we approach it, in three ways. One is to anchor the discussion around a problem. So this problem must not be just any kind of problem. It must fulfill three criteria. Number one, it has to be a complex problem. Number two, it has to be a persistent problem. And number three, it has to be an extended problem. So with this problem-centric curriculum, students will then attempt to problem solve this problem, and that's where we bring in the STEM. But we also realize that in implementing this kind of curriculum, it can be very challenging for teachers. So imagine, a teacher says that, okay, let's look at this problem, and then you have a class of 40 students with 40 different ideas about, how to go about solving this problem. And so it becomes very difficult for a teacher to manage. So this is from our observation in implementing some of these problem-centric STEM lessons. So that is how we came up with a second centricity, which is the solution-centric STEM. So what we did was to actually provide the student with a known existing solution to a problem, and they are challenged to improve on the solution. So that actually helps to scope the discussion and makes it more manageable for the teacher. But over time, we also realized that, our students are very good with problem solving and, addressing, solutions and so on and so forth. But perhaps, we need to address a different aspect of, 21st century learning, which is the humanistic side of things. So social empathy, cultural sensitivity, gender sensitivity, and so on and so forth. And so that is when we created the user-centric STEM curriculum. That means you actually foreground the user. You think about who are the beneficiaries of the solution that you will come up with, and then to build, the solutions around them. So that is how we anchor our STEM lessons and design our STEM curriculum. But of course, in the actual enactment, how do you actually carry it out? It's actually a range of various pedagogies, which includes, all the inquiry approaches, the questioning, and so on and so forth. So actually this, raises a very interesting question, is there such a thing as a STEM PCK? We're all used to, talking about science PCK or math PCK, but how about, is there such a thing as a STEM PCK? Given that, STEM is so diverse, is there something generic about it? Okay, so I guess I will just stop at this point here, and let's perhaps move on to take the next question here. Again, it's a question that's directed to Dr. Kinley, but I guess the rest of us can also address this question here. How does your various economy address the challenge of implementing STEM education on the online platform or remote teaching? I think we can resonate with this very well given the current pandemic situation. So does anyone like to share what you have done?
Okay, maybe I will I will share. I think the past couple of years have been very difficult for our math and science teachers. Even prior to the pandemic, teaching math and science was already a big challenge, and the moving into the remote teaching and learning certainly further complicated matters. And in the Philippines, again, there is a disparity, of the haves and have-nots. So those with access and those without. But our Department of Education generally shifted to a modular approach. And I can, 1 hour wouldn't be sufficient to list down all the challenges attendant to that. But I think the teachers, when I listen to them, to their experiences, to the efforts that they take just to get the message across to the students, sometimes I find that really heroic. Like the teachers in the rural areas, they would go to the mountains, go to the houses of the students to deliver these modules, and the parents come and they would try to teach the parents so that the parents would be able to assist their kids as they learn. And then at the higher level, of course, we try to find ways, softwares, programs that students with internet access could download, maybe some simulations, so that we can replicate to some extent what they do in laboratory, the experiments and stuff, and we try to make use of the materials available at home. But I think it cannot be discounted that the past 2 years the students really experienced major learning losses, and the math and science teachers in the Philippines losses. But yeah, so at the moment, we are slowly transitioning we have experimental classes now. We have like a few classes in each school trying out face-to-face, but again, it's been a difficult year for math and science teachers and the learners.
Thank you very much, Gladys. Yes, indeed, I agree with you, because given the nature of STEM, there is a very strong hands-on component to it. So that's why, without the hands-on, I think some form of the interest in that learning is compromised. Yes. So I really salute all the teachers, for making the extra effort, taking the extra mile to just, deliver those STEM kits modules to the students. And meriSTEM, because we do the international outreach work, so we do work with teachers in Indonesia as well as in Thailand. It was challenging for us as well, having to do these virtual training with hands-on. So we are very thankful that we could actually find a good partner in Indonesia, was in the local Indonesian university, UPI actually, and to have our local partners to act as facilitators. So we actually work with them virtually here. We provided the the material list and the instructions, and they actually help with the facilitation on site. And so that was how things got going, and it was great. It's a lot of coordination, and so that is one way we got things moving during the pandemic, right? Okay. Yes. So perhaps I can move on to the next question. Does the rest of the panelists want to chime in on this? Heng, you want to talk about your interactions with our partners in Thailand, because you also did run a teacher consultancy on STEM PD with the teachers in Thailand, right? And it was done over a virtual format. So perhaps you can share with us, how this was done.
Thanks, Teng, but maybe before I do that, I thought I wanted to respond a little to a few of the questions posed previously. And I think Gladys has kind of highlighted one important trait that we should always keep in mind about teachers. That is their heart for the students. I think whether it's COVID times or pre-COVID times or even the post-COVID time, we should always remember that teaching is relational. And I think one of the important aspects of teacher development or teacher education is to grow and nurture this mindset, productive mindsets for the future. And some of these productive mindsets doesn't depend on the technology. I think we are very privileged here, like Teng has shared, in Singapore, we are very privileged here. We do have some students who have difficulty accessing internet, or maybe they do not have a conducive environment at home. But I think in part because of our resource-rich environment, we are able to provide these students with a place to study. We have dedicated teachers who, despite the COVID situation, will go to the schools, to mentor these students on a one-to-one basis. So much like what Gladys has shared, the teachers are really heroes. They go to the mountains to reach out to these students, and I think that's what we want to keep. And with regard to teacher education, what are we going to do? I mean, there are so many things we can do, but maybe before we even tackle some of the more challenging aspects, like the teacher knowledge and things like that, perhaps one of the main thing we want to make sure is our teachers have the right mindsets. Their hearts are at the right place. I think that really helps to spearhead any change that we want to implement, whether it's policy or teacher education, or even general educational directions. But back to what Teng was mentioning about the Thai experience, I think we try to have a good partner in the host country, like in this case Thailand, and because of the partnership, strong partnership, we could mount online training with the Thai teachers, and they were able to access the materials, and and technology has made things possible that were maybe not so much talked about in the past. I think one great thing that we now have is access to information, access to webinars, access to free webinars. I mean, think about it. In the past, if you want to listen to a symposium or a webinar, or maybe a seminar, you have to fly over to that country, to do that. Now every one of us is so comfortable, doing Zoom webinars, and I think this is going to stay for a while. But I think that the kind of partnership that we need is crucial in order to make STEM education more accessible to everyone. Our Thailand experiences, the Indonesian experiences, and our work with other partners in the region attest to that. That we need partners. And perhaps one question for all of us to think about is, how do we then enhance this partnership between the different countries? Because we all have the same goal, right? We want to improve STEM education. We want to enhance the quality of STEM learning experiences for all our students. So what can we bring to the table? We all know that education is about the whole village being involved, in education. And so now being a global village, how do we do that? Yeah, so maybe that's a question for all of us to consider.
Yeah, thank you very much, Heng, for bringing up this point about the whole ecosystem. How do we all work together? And later, I see that Gladys has put up her hand, so I will give the time to Gladys. But after that, I'm thinking whether I could invite Professor Paul Teng to give him, to hear from his, because Professor Teng has always, been in leadership position, and he always have this very broad macro view of what is happening around the world. So I just want to seek his wisdom on this idea of the STEM global village. But Gladys, you want to take the floor first?
Yeah, I was just thinking that now, given the discussions on the pandemic, we really need to design a STEM education program that is more disruption-free. Like how do we now teach pre-service teachers? Do we prepare them for online teaching, face-to-face teaching, hybrid, and also this pandemic has implications to the offering of STEM teacher education programs in TEIs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gladys. So Professor Paul Teng, want to seek your wisdom on
Well, I'm not sure
the
about
question.
wisdom, Teng, but I certainly give some observations. You know, I don't know whether Gladys knows, I lived for 18 years in the Philippines.
Oh,
I do know the
18.
Philippine, yes, so I do know the Philippine system quite well. But it strikes me just listening to the conversation and the questions, you know, that I think many of the issues that are affecting STEM education are no different from issues affecting all other teachers. You know, the issues related to, you know, the rural, urban, the haves and the have-nots, you know, the teacher professionalism, you know, and even questions of compensation. Okay? I think they're all very issues that all teachers face. And I think in Singapore, certainly, you know, Singapore made a very conscious effort, okay, that in order to have a quality education system, we need to invest significantly in leveling up teachers as professionals, basically. Yeah. On the one hand, on the other hand, as one of our ministers said, he wanted to make every school a good school, okay, to address this big divide. You know, but then that's easier said than done because Singapore is, you know, is such a small country. Okay, you know, it's a fraction of what Bhutan in the Philippines. Coincidentally, you know, this morning I was just in a conversation with the Vice Chancellor of Bhutan, the Royal University of Bhutan, and your two presidents of education. And STEM education came up during the conversation, and how, you know, the king's, you know, edict is really given extra impetus, okay, to look seriously at how STEM education can really be implemented across the country. Okay, but to me the message, you know, again is one which is very consistent. Unless there's strong policy support at the highest levels, it's tough to get things done. Okay, and as we, you know, kind of heard today, I think, you know, also in the chapters, that policy support must again be followed by implementation measures and the appropriate funding to make things happen. Yeah, otherwise, things are not going to happen at all. And it's not a short-term solution. It's a mid to longer-term solution for things to really take effect in themselves. Okay, but what is also interesting to me is that, you know, and I think Ban kind of alluded to this. You know, we mustn't forget that STEM education is not just for economic reasons. Yeah, there are other benefits and other necessities, you know, that come from having a STEM education. Right? We talked about 21st century competencies, you know, authentic learning, and STEM education is such a good, you know, modality really to achieve some of those. I remember visiting some rural schools, you know, both in the Philippines and also in parts of rural China, where authentic learning was really used, okay, to bring together all the different disciplines. You know, getting children to understand, for example, you know, how does a rice plant grow? It's physics, it's chemistry, it's biology. It's also society coming together. Just think about how it takes a village, you know, to nurture a child, right? It's the same with rice growing, kind of thing, you know. And I saw some excellent examples of authentic learning actually in the countryside, using what exists in the countryside. Of course, then when it comes to sophistication, now that's where your main problems are. The labs and so on, they aren't replicated evenly. And I really empathize with countries like Bhutan and the Philippines. They are totally dispersed. You know, and Indonesia is an example. How do you manage thousands of islands and school systems that are so different and are subject to local environments? But finally, I wanted to say that I think apart from the economic values, you know, of STEM education, and also the building of value systems, I think STEM education is also very key for us going forward to promote science literacy for society. To me, that's one of the biggest challenges that all our countries face. Because as we all know, you know, I think technology imperative is influencing all of us in societies all over the world. Whether it's a mobile phone, you know, whether it's the kind of food we eat and so on, you know. So that's a very important side benefit of actually promoting STEM education. That to actually promote the science literate society, which I think we're all heading towards, whether we like it or not. Okay? One interesting question that hasn't come out so far is, you know, why STEM? Why not STEAM? I thought that question would come up. I mean, I don't have an answer for that, but, you know. So again, I think, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to share a few thoughts. They're not pearls of wisdom, but there's some thoughts certainly. And this conversation is really fascinating. I mean, there's so much we can learn from each other, really. So thanks. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Professor Teng. Well, I'm mindful of the time, so I'm watching it. I also see that there are a lot more questions in the Q&A room that we have not addressed. I think given the limited time that we have, I would say that if there are any one of you who have posted questions but we have not addressed it, please feel free to contact the panelists, any one of us, whom you wish to direct this question to, and I think we will take some time to answer, to address your questions and your concerns. There are some specific questions for specific speakers. I guess at the end of this session, we can all leave our emails in the chat room, so for the participants to contact us directly if they wish to. There are other questions that are left unattended, and they have always appeared, is the question on assessment. Somehow when it comes to STEM, we are still trying to grapple with teaching and learning, and then there's this question about assessment that will always appear. It is not a question that can be easily addressed within a seminar. There is also a question about, we are talking about these macro policies and changes that's happening at the broad macro level, but can we share about how do we actually carry out an integrated STEM lesson? I think such kinds of topics would be better addressed in a workshop and not at a seminar, because you really need to experience the entire process as a student yourself before you learn how to carry out as a teacher. So that is how we conduct our teacher professional development courses at NIE, is to get the teachers to go through it like a student. And yes, there was also a question about what is happening in Singapore. Just to highlight that today this is the first session of the 2 book launch webinars. The second one, which will be on Wednesday, we will focus on the other 2 sections on STEM curriculum and STEM education research. In this book, we have 2 chapters from Singapore that is in section 3 and section 4. So on Wednesday, you will also hear from the speakers from Malaysia as well as Hong Kong. So with that, I think I will just like to sum up this webinar by saying that we have attempted to address some of the interesting topics, but also as usual, we always end up raising more questions than giving answers to some of these conundrums that is happening in STEM education. But some of the key things, some of my key takeaways from this particular webinar is that while listening to any speakers, including the speakers from this who are contributors of this book, is that we should be mindful of the different kinds of STEM that we are talking about. In some contexts, we are talking about segregated forms of STEM. In some contexts, we are talking about more integrated forms of STEM. Sometimes we use it interchangeably. So you just the participants and audience have to just be mindful that we may be referring to different kinds of STEM. And the other topic that came out is good quality STEM. So then the question is, how do we define what is good quality? Right? Even with the term, I've been Googling this term called best practices, and I couldn't find an answer to it. What do you mean by best practices? Right? And then, as Professor Teng has alluded to, a lot of these issues that we have raised today are basically rooted in very old problems. They are not new issues. It's just that when it comes to STEM education, it has perhaps worsen some of these problems, because now we are not talking about improving a particular discipline, but trying to bring together various disciplines, and each discipline has its own problem. So basically we are multiplying all the problems together, and I think Heng has said that there's a multiplier effect to this. So with that, I would like to close this session and thank everyone for your participation and contributions to this webinar. So thank you very much, panelists, as well as the audience. I'll pass the time back to Vignesh.
Thank you very much, Tang Wee, and thank you very much again to our panelists, our commentators, for their insights and their sharing during today's session. Ladies and gentlemen, as Professor Tang Wee has shared, this is part 1 of a 2-part book launch. So ladies and gentlemen, if you're registered for part 1, you are registered for part 2. So please use the same login details and join us again on Wednesday, same time, same place, to enjoy this session. And listen to what our speakers have to say. We have speakers from Malaysia, from Hong Kong, and from Singapore during our next session as we look more at issues beyond what we discussed today, as we discuss issues around curriculum and education research in STEM. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, may I remind you about the promotional code that's available, STEM40. Use the code, scan the QR code. You can purchase the book directly from the website. And together with our partners, Routledge, we'd like to thank you for attending today's session and invite you back to attend part 2 on Wednesday. Same time, same place. Goodbye.